Good morning. Welcome to the College of Law and Management Studies School of Management, IT and Governance webinar. We'll be discussing the concepts of management and entrepreneurship today. My name is Tia van der Westhuizen and I'm part of the management and entrepreneurship discipline. Management studies and entrepreneurship could be two of the most important issues which our society faces today. I was watching Professor Otto Scharmer from the Presencing Institute at MIT's 60th birthday celebration this weekend on LinkedIn. And he made a comment about social systems where he said that globally, social systems are in a crisis and our social systems are dying. But in the same process, something else is being reborn. He also said that one of the most common questions or statements made by many people when it comes to improving this crisis is, I don't know. Through research, learning and teaching, management and entrepreneurship, universities have exciting times ahead as they continue to educate the next generation of managers and entrepreneurs. We have emailed you a short note to set the scene for today's discussion, and we will post the note again during the chat box in case you missed the email. Quickly, I just want to run through today's program and do some housekeeping with you. Right. We're currently busy with an opening, following by Professor Dan Remenyi, who is the keynote panelist and will deliver an occasional paper. After that, we will have our panelists delivering short presentations, Dr. David Sarpong, Professor Rose Poon, Professor Vannie Naidoo, and then we'll do a summation of the points. After that, the panel will have a discussion amongst themselves, and then we'll open it for Q&As from you. You will be posting your Q&As in the Zoom tool. After we have a general discussion between ourselves, we will do some closing remarks and the panel will take a position. We will close the session and speak about possible future opportunities. Now, on housekeeping of today, just the way how we're going to interact in the webinar today, at the bottom of your Zoom, you will see a Q&A tool. Please use that tool to post any questions or comments that you have for the panelists. In the chat box, you are only able to chat to the event host if needed, but again, if you want to ask a question or to make a comment, please use the Q&A tool. At the moment, this webinar is being live streamed on the YouTube channel. So if you think this is exciting and share it with a friend, direct them to the UKZN YouTube channel where they can watch this live right now. If you pose a question in the Q&A tool, we might ask you to unmute yourself and interactively ask the questions or provide your comments and feedbacks if you have any. After today, we will send you a link of the video recording in case there's something you would like to revisit. I have the pleasure to introduce you to Professor Dan Remenyi. Now, before I introduce Prof. Dan and just give you an overview about him, I want to give you an idea of who is with us today in the webinar. We have a diverse group of delegates and received 443 registrations today, ranging from university, academia, and professional staff, undergrad and postgrad students, business professionals, entrepreneurs. We've seen registrations coming for management and leadership from a variety of sectors. For example, the local government and large international corporations. These seems to be alumni from UKZN, so welcome to our university alumni as well. We have a wide national and international participation today. When we look at the registrations, we looked at about 8 different South African universities being present and also 6 different countries being represented today. Professor Dan Remenyi is honorary professor at UKZN, the School of Management, IT and Governance, and hosted by the Management and Entrepreneurship discipline. After 20 years in the business, he joined academia about 30 years ago. His main academic interest is research methodology and the sociology of research. He has held visiting professorships at 10 different universities between the UK, Ireland, South Africa, and Sweden. He has more than 60 peer-reviewed academic papers, but published over 30 books. He's an alumnus of our university, and he holds a BSoc Science, MBA, and a PhD. He's currently the director of Academic Conferences International and Academic Bookshop. Dan, Professor, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. Let me see if I can get my share screen to work to start off this exercise. It's a great privilege to be back and being involved with UKZN, and I really look forward to this discussion we're going to have today. I would also say that it is really a great privilege to be involved in the School of Management. I think management is such an important subject. It is really every aspect of our lives are touched by management. And those of us who are good at management do seem to be able to perform generally in life so much better than those who are not. Management is, after all, at the center of wealth creation. And I thought I'd put a slide up which typified for me what wealth creation is about. Because when I talk about wealth creation, I'm not talking about the accumulation of a vast sum of money. I see the objective of business is to increase the national wealth, and I see that as being the development and the sustainability of a flow of goods and services. And so I put on this slide here a overwhelmingly colorful and such a large variety of products in some sort of supermarket somewhere in the world. I think I'd be very confused if I were to go into such a place. And to contrast it with what we always show as the image of some place in crisis where you see empty shelves in supermarkets. So it's really a business really about the flow. And that's why I included this little picture at the bottom there of a river with lots of white water, because the flow of goods and services in society is a very complex matter. And often we find that there are ripples, that it doesn't always work quite the right way that we want to. So one of my opening comments about management is that indeed it is a very complex business. The second slide, which I have, and I am now being challenged to change slides. So here I am. I felt I should ask myself and ask you, how well have we been doing with management and business, and how well have we performed over the years? I mean, management is a relatively new concept. It has been around for well, management has existed for a very long time, but we've only been formally discussing it and thinking about it and teaching about it for a relatively small amount of time. There's some interesting papers that were created back at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, but it really was only in the 1950s with Peter Drucker, who came on the scene and who made it into a highly popular subject, that there has been an enormous explosion of work on management. And I'll show you a slide about that in a moment. But the other thing I wanted to reflect on is how well have we been doing as a society? Have we been successful in producing a better society in the last few years? And I'm really reminded of Charles Dickens, who is the man in the middle of that slide, when he wrote in his famous opening to The Tale of Two Cities, it is the best of times, it is the worst of times. We have made so much progress on so many fronts, and they're not just technology, but in lots of other fronts. The man on the slide next to Charles Dickens is Steve Pinker, and he points out that the world today is much more peaceful, much more prosperous, etc., than he believes ever before. My problem with that is that I think there is still so much more work to do. We have a long way to go before I feel we should be satisfied with what we have. But nonetheless, we need to recognize the achievements we have made to date. The number of, or the amount of work that's been done in the management field is really quite phenomenal. There are just so many people working in this field. The number of textbooks published is quite breathtaking. I asked a colleague of mine to do an investigation of this for me the other day, and he came back to me and he said that Kindle offers 80,000 titles with the word management in it. I was quite staggered by that number. It is absolutely enormous. So 80,000 people have bothered to write books, have told stories about their experiences in the management field. I find that to be an enormously impressive number. There is one thing to be slightly concerned about, and that is that the vast majority, and I really have no way of being able to put a reasonably accurate is not quite the right word, but just a reasonable estimate on how many of these are not from the USA. The USA dominates our thinking, the research in this field. And of course, there are cultural differences. We don't all do things the same way. We have, in fact, many different approaches to what we consider to be management issues and what management problems are. So a huge amount of work, the 80,000 books, and who knows how many academic papers that have been published in journals. I do want to have sort of I want to place on record a sort of caution about the issue of so many different perspectives on management, and this is an issue that has been highlighted by a man called Sumatra Ghoshal, and he has coined the expression "the pretense of knowledge," and what he pointed out is it's quite easy to illustrate it from just taking the example of Michael Porter. Michael Porter is today still considered to be such an important thinker, writer, researcher in the field of strategy. He really opened it up to a huge audience that it wasn't available to before. Putting it into perspective, Alfred Chandler was one of the early authors, followed by Igor Ansel. Those are the two other men in the photograph. And Porter pointed out that companies that he studied had two basic corporate strategies. They could be differentiators or they could be cost leaders. And in so doing, he kind of laid down a prescription that companies began to follow. In other words, he identified a few companies who were doing this, and by saying that this was the way companies should do it, lots of others followed. And so there was a pretense of knowledge, and as far as what we come up with in social science is not quite as deterministic, in fact, not as deterministic as the findings other researchers come up with in the physical sciences or the medical sciences. There's another item to draw your attention to, which is the gap between the theory and the practice. And I think this is especially important in management. Here are two photographs, one of an enormously important figure in the history of management studies, a man called Henri Fayol, a Frenchman writing at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, who said that management was about planning, organizing, motivating, and controlling. And from the very first lecture in management, which I attended at the forerunner of UKZN at UND in the 1960s, I was told that that is what management was, and nobody ever questioned it until Henry Mintzberg, who is the other Henry in the picture here, a Canadian, did his doctorate in the 1960s, and he went into companies and he discovered managers don't plan, organize, motivate, and control much of the time. He came up with the fact that managers most of the time are problem solvers or running around firefighting. So there is this issue as to what is management really about. Now I want to propose a definition that I would like to use in the discussion later on today, and I hope that my colleagues on the panel will perhaps look at this carefully and be highly critical of it. But I believe that the essence of management is to do with how the organization focuses on the culture and objectives of the top decision makers, and how the objectives and the culture is disseminated, inculcated, and policed and reinforced in the organization. Management is the beginning, and the end is about action. And it's not about sitting back and thinking. It's about doing the things that need to be done to make the organization a success. And of course, there can be good management and there can be bad management. And I'm sure many of us will have experienced organizations where the management is pretty awful. I have agreed to do this in 15 minutes, and I am certainly now quite hard pressed for time. So I'm going to just go quickly through the issues on entrepreneurship. What I'd like to make absolutely clear is that entrepreneurship is an evolving concept, that it is something that is relatively new as well, but new in the sense that it crept into the economic literature back at by 1800 it was established. And it was considered to be a factor of production, that there were three traditional old factors of production: land, labor, and capital. But how were they put together? They had to be put together by some human intervention. And this human intervention was entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship made the company come alive and made it succeed. And within that, there was an element of the need for continuous innovation. And in order to sustain success, we have to be continually developing, bringing in new ideas and refreshing what we're doing. And that was what entrepreneurship was about. Shortly thereafter, entrepreneurship then became about how to launch new divisions or new subsidiaries or new businesses. And that seems to me to be a second conceptualization of the word entrepreneurship. Today, there's a third one, where we now talk about entrepreneurship simply as a mindset of people who are looking for opportunities to improve the situation they were in. So anything that says, hey, how can we do this better? How can we get more out of this? This can be attributed to a entrepreneurial mindset. And I think that's the way the word is being used more and more today. Entrepreneurship, unfortunately, has become the sort of save all thing we're going to do. We're going to be saved by entrepreneurs. You know, our economies are in difficulty throughout the world. How are we going to save them? We're going to have entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, that is not as simple as it sounds. There's a very interesting man at NYU, University of New York, called Scott Galloway. And Scott Galloway says that entrepreneurship has brought about, or from entrepreneurship, we've got the love of innovation. And he now talks about idolatry of innovation, that we see in innovation, we must change things, we must be new the whole time. And he says that we should look at the 4 greatest entrepreneurial organizations of all times. And that is Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. In fact, he is an extraordinarily opinionated man, and he has some, what I think a lot of people would say were some very cocky ideas. One of which is he says that all business schools should immediately change their curricula, and there should only be 4 courses in business schools. The first course should be Amazon 1, then it should be Apple 1, then it should be Facebook 1, and then it should be Google 1. This really says is that these 4 organizations should be teaching us how to run our society. Now, I completely reject that. I think that these 4 organizations are really very interesting, and we do have a lot to learn from them. But alas, there's a problem with regards to the fact that successful organizations are not always such wonderful members of our greater community. And I think we have issues with regards to how Amazon employs certain groups of people. The same with Apple. We have big problems with Facebook with regards to what is acceptable to put up on the internet and what is not, and Google similarly. So it isn't all that simple that entrepreneurship is always the right way to go, and that success is always to be welcome. Finally, I'd like to say that entrepreneurship is really very important at a different level, at a different angle, and that is that by encouraging people to think about the possibility of their having a business, we're actually asking them to think about the possibility of empowering themselves, to say that I can do it. You know, this it's a bit like the Nike logo, or the Nike motto, do it. Is that when we deal with our students, we have to, at the end of the day, become aware that no matter how good the concepts we are, that how good the concepts are that we tell them about, or how well we explain them, etc., at the end of the day, we need to actually encourage them to go and to do things. And action is what is central to this. Now, I have quite a lot more stuff on the slides here, but I want to raise those issues during the discussion. I would think that my 15 minutes are well and truly over. So I'd like to hand back to the chair, to Dr. van der Westhuizen. Thank you very much. Thea, you're taking it back.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Prof. Dan. Setting the scene as for today, I hope you found it very informative. And if you do have a comment or a question to ask Prof. Remenyi, hit that Q&A button, write it down. We are looking forward to receive your questions, your comments, your contributions. We've already seen some comments coming in. Thank you. Next on the panel is Dr. David Sarpong. He is an honorary research fellow at UKZN School of Management, IT and Governance, and hosted by the Management and Entrepreneurship discipline. He is a reader in strategic management, the head of Brunel University Strategy, Entrepreneurship and International Business Unit, or Research Group. His research interest lies in the broad areas of strategic management and international management, and his current research concerns second-order innovation and technology management, as well as strategic foresight. He is the co-convener of the annual doctoral symposium at the British Academy of Management, and he serves on that council subcommittee of academic affairs and conference and capacity building. Dr. Sarpong, over to you. Reminder, if you've got any questions, please put it in the Q&A tool. Thank you.
Right. So thank you very much, Tia. I suppose I've got 5 minutes, so I will try to round up as quickly as possible. And obviously, whatever I'm going to say here kind of follow up from my colleague's presentation, Dan's presentation on taking us through what has come to be known as management in contemporary practice, and of course, its link with entrepreneurship. So I have been serving on the British Academy of Management Council. Actually, I have just been elected as the vice chair for capacity and conference. So I will be in charge of the conferences in the next coming years. And but obviously, I don't think I can speak on behalf of the academy now, because I will be taking over office, I suppose, from January 2022. That notwithstanding, having been on the council for some time, I think some of the things we're doing there, that's fitting and speaks to the sort of issues that's just been raised. And I would like to take them head on and try to see how we could address the problem with what has come to be known as management and, of course, entrepreneurship. And obviously, going to business schools, they are being treated as different subjects altogether, whereas in practice, or when it comes to what we do, these things somehow overlap, because you cannot manage people without being entrepreneurial. Neither can you be entrepreneurial without knowing how to manage issues. That feeds back to the very debate and challenges we've been facing at the academy. And it's not just the British Academy alone. I know the Academy of Management, which is the mother organization of management scholars in the United States, as well as grappling with the same issue. And of course, so many business schools are grappling with these issues, and it goes beyond the business school to engineering faculties, and everyone is on deck trying to help resolve. And the issue has got to do with the gap between what we say rigor and relevance. So when it comes to the kind of research that we do in universities, obviously, because we end up speaking to our fellow academics, our fellow scholars, the way we theorize is a bit different. The way we collect data, I wouldn't say it's that different from what people do in practice. But then when we are communicating what we do, when we're communicating what we think management should be about, we end up speaking to ourselves, and that is what we do best. We are always encouraged to at least try to come up with some implications for practice for what we've written, but it is so difficult because we try as much as possible to pursue a science. But in practice, we also know that management is an applied science. Yes, we call it a subject, but there's really nothing like management. We borrow ideas from psychology, from sociology, anthropology, engineering. So management is an applied science. And on that basis, if we want to apply most of the scientific methods, sometimes it becomes very complicated because we obviously deal with people. And that in the academy, we spent lots of time trying to improve on the efficacy of our theories and our theorization, to the extent that we end up losing our periphery. And our periphery here, I'm referring to practice. So we're supposed to talk to practice, what managers do, and help them to understand what they are doing better, and of course improve on their practice. But then there is always an epistemic gap whenever we are addressing these issues, and we end up not filling these gaps, bridging theory to practice. And that has been one of the biggest problems that management scholars are facing. And of course, there's been calls for us to respond and try to help managers to do better because management, to some extent, is been in crisis. We heard of some of the stories that was just told. We've got few people who have become extremely rich. Organizations now exist for the benefit of the shareholders, whereas in practice, you would have expected that society would have been much, much fairer, and that organizations belong to all of us, and the value that they create, everyone will be able to capture some. But you get few people capturing this value, and that is what we have to work about to bring some fairness in society. And until we're able to bridge the gap between theory and practice, academics become a bit alienated, and we do not know what's happening. From this perspective, at academy, and of course in so many business schools, there's been what we're referring to as, or we've been referring to as the turn to practice. The turn to practice here is about bridging the gap between what people say they do, what managers do, and what they actually do in practice. So if I'm talking about management, it's not about me sitting in my room theorizing what people do, but I have to go to the field, I have to speak to managers, I have to observe them in their situated practice to get to understand what they do. Because in society, think of it, if you ask somebody, how do you manage? Obviously, they will tell you, oh, I do this, and in the morning, I sign off the ledger, and we buy our goods from the suppliers and so on. But then if you go in to observe these managers, you will realize that what they say they do is actually different from what they actually do. And that is the call to practice when that is what we're trying to do now, to try to bridge this gap. Obviously, it's difficult to do. And the biggest challenge has been the issue of inclusivity, which I mentioned earlier on in bridging this kind of gap, because we think a lot of people are not being looked at. And when it comes to entrepreneurship in particular, all the emphasis has always been on those at the top level. We are talking about Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and those who have acquired so much wealth, to the extent that we do not look at the people at the base of the pyramid. We do not look at the people who are barefoot entrepreneurs. Those people, that's we have to look at, but rather we glorify, we present the entrepreneur as a hero. And that conceptualization tends to demean what others do. And what we have to do now as scholars, obviously, is to try to bridge this gap. But we need managers on board as well. We need them to think the unthinkable. We need them to identify opportunities that is otherwise overlooked by so many of their contemporaries. And of course, shouldn't wait for government to always come in to resolve some of the problems we have in our societies.
Thank you so much.
Coming to do this.
David, thank you. Thank you so much.
This is 5 minutes now. So, yeah, so obviously we will have a longer debate, and we will definitely have some discussions and take on some of the issues that Dan actually raised.
Definitely. We can look further on how we can discuss and bridging those gaps during the panel discussion that's coming up. Thank you so much for sharing your views. So the next panelist that's up is Professor Rosemond Boone. I hope I pronounce it correctly. So Prof. Boone prepared an abstract. While I introduce her, please have a read on what's currently showing on the screen. Prof. Rose is an honorary research fellow at UKZN School of Management, IT and Governance, and she's hosted by the Management and Entrepreneurship discipline. She's an Associate Professor of Enterprise Development at the Center of Entrepreneurship and Small Enterprise Development at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. She was the former head of the Department of Management Studies, Vice Dean of the School of Business, Dean for International Education at the University of Cape Coast, and a visiting professor at Bonn University of Applied Sciences in Germany. Professor Rose, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tia, and thank you for having me on this panel discussion. I think I will build on what Dan and David discussed, looking at the concepts of management and entrepreneurship. I will want to first focus on the concept of management. And I think when Dan was doing his presentation, he was trying to look at the chronology of how the word management, the concept came about, trying to look at from the time it started in the Industrial Revolution. Then, of course, if you look at scientific management, Frederick Taylor's theory, then, of course, we come to time and motion, study by Fayol. And then, of course, we came to the systems approach, where we were looking at the open and the closed systems. Then we have McGregor's theory X and theory Y. Then we had the contingency theory. And of course, later we had the total quality management and other Uchi's theory Z coming into the fray of. So you agree with me that if you look at the concept, it has developed and evolved over time. And like David said, how do we bring together theory and practice? And if you read the historical background and you look at some of the sub-concepts that came out from these various writers, you realize that most of them came out with these theories based on research they carried out, and they added on to some of the various conceptualizations when we come to management. For instance, if you look at the Hawthorne theory. But as we've been discussing, we have to ask ourselves, we don't live in an environment that is static. We live in an environment that is always changing. And you agree with me that if you pick this COVID-19 pandemic and the aftermath, of course, we are still in the pandemic. You realize that we have to change the way we manage. It doesn't mean that those previous concepts like the human relations theory, the contingency theory, you manage based on the contingencies of the situation have changed. It means that we also have to evolve some of these concepts to suit the changes in the environment. And therefore, for instance, now we are looking at even the fourth industrial revolution, where we are looking at information and communications technology. So how do we manage, or how do we practice management in this current dispensation? We all know that when we talk of management, it's simply we are looking at the definition of, I'll pick Mary Parker Fowler's definition, looking at how do we do things and through other people. And now that because of the pandemic, we are asking people to work from home. How do we even manage those people who are working from home? It means that at the end of the day, we also have to be what we call innovative. And that is where I also bring in the concept of entrepreneurship. When we talk of entrepreneurship, usually I tell people that with entrepreneurship opportunities without being constrained by the resources you own. And therefore, when we are looking at some of these issues, and we have the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have to manage within this pandemic, we have to manage people who are working from home, people who are working remotely. We also have globalization. We are managing people from other international locations. How do you do that? And that is where the innovation aspect of entrepreneurship comes in. And I will agree with David that yes, although there may be a few differences between management and entrepreneurship, they complement each other, because of course you can't talk about management without talking about innovation. Managers, you are managing through and with other people. You have to be innovative in the way you manage people, especially when there is a turbulent environment and the circumstances are changing. Then when you are also entrepreneurial, you are taking advantage of opportunity. You also have to plan. Like in management, we plan. You have to organize. You have to direct, because you should be able to bring people on board. You have to be able to control. Even in entrepreneurship, you set targets, you set goals. At the end of the day, you are asking yourself, how will I be able to achieve those goals? So, because I have 5 minutes, I just want to interrogate the issues so that at the end of the day, when we come to the discussion, we'll discuss some of these issues. So you realize that at the end of the day, when you pick these two concepts, they have evolved, although the basis or the foundations have not changed. For instance, if you pick entrepreneurship, even if you look at its beginning from the 17th century, where people are talking about the entrepreneurs taking risk. Then the 18th century, you are looking at someone with capital, someone who also needs capital. So how do they come together to start something? When you come to the 19th and 20th century, we are looking at entrepreneurship being associated with innovation. Then, of course, 21st century, remember, I've talked about internet, information, and communication technology. So in the 21st century, you are also looking at creation. You are looking at invention in the area of information and communication technology. So now if you put the two concepts together and you look at the fourth industrial revolution, then it means that we are looking at entrepreneurship and management in this era of artificial intelligence. We are looking at entrepreneurship and management in this era of Internet of Things, in this era of big data. So how do you use some of these terms and what happens in this era to manage the people we have in organization, to theorize, to bridge the gap between theory and practice? When you pick entrepreneurship, for instance, someone was saying that, yes, when we say entrepreneurship, we are looking at people starting businesses. But entrepreneurship is not always people starting businesses. We are looking at the entrepreneurial mindset. We are looking at social entrepreneurship. Now, even people have coined a lot of terms. We have eco-entrepreneurship. We have digital entrepreneurship. We have agricultural entrepreneurship. They call it agripreneurship. So you can agree with me that these two concepts, they have not changed. They have evolved. And they have evolved to suit the changing circumstances. It doesn't mean that the previous concept or the previous underlying foundations, like managing people well, like organization collaborating with the external environment, like managing based on the contingencies of the situation, has changed. And what is my 5 minutes up?
and it's fascinating. It's so fascinating, Prof. Rose.
Thank you very much. I'll continue during the discussion. Yeah.
Let's continue this discussion on how we bring these concepts together when we have our panel discussions. Thank you so much. Our next panelist that's going to give some feedback is Professor Vannie Naidoo, and she prepared this abstract that you can currently see on your screen. And please read through this while I'll give you a background on Prof. Naidoo. I also want to remind you to please use the Q&A button if you want to engage with the panelists and you got a question that you want to ask. Professor Vannie Naidoo is an associate professor and researcher at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in the College of Law and Management Studies. Her focus is in the management and entrepreneurship discipline. Her field of teaching is management, corporate strategy, project management, entrepreneurship, research methodology, and marketing. She has supervised and graduated over 30 PhD and master students to date. She sits on local and international conference boards, editorial boards, and has published various peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters in both interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research. Prof. Naidoo has been a keynote speaker at 2 international conferences and a resource speaker at the AAU East Africa. Prof. Naidoo, over to you. 5 minutes to give us a brief on your perspectives. Thank you
so much, Thank you so much, Chair. Good day to you all. Management thought has evolved over time. I also agree with that concept put forward by the speakers before me. Management has continued to evolve, as we see in the fourth industrial revolution and now the COVID-19 pandemic. A few points I would like to raise in terms of, for example, the fourth industrial revolution. Some technologies have disrupted the natural order of things. For example, the biopiracy imposing GMOs by Bill Gates and the data mining by Mark Zuckerberg, who is stealing our privacy. And the whole idea of freedom, as far as in my view, is that valuing our privacy is important. And if that is eroded, then I foresee serious problems in society in the future. In my readings, I came across Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's transcendental consciousness, which was later taken into organizations, and transcendental meditation technique was developed and put forth within organizations. The yogis posits that the experience of transcendental consciousness develops the individual's latent creative potential, which, while dissolving accumulated stress and fatigue through the deep rest gained during the practice. The experience enlivens within one's awareness, creativity, dynamism, orderliness, and the organizing power, which results in increasing effectiveness and success in daily life. According to Wallace, by the early 1990s, over 4 million individuals had learned the transcendental meditation technique. Reports indicate that both managers and employees have been trained in TM techniques as a business tool in many countries, including United States, Australia, UK, India, Japan, Germany, and Sweden. Research studies on transcendental consciousness reveal that managers or employees who embarked on these meditative practices were more alert and increased wakefulness and clarity of thinking during the rest of the day. They also appear to have improved management skills. These practices, many authors have written about in management and leaders, including Eaton, Alexander, Quinn, Tobalt, and Weatherby. Furthermore, conscious-based management development appears to affect that are beyond the individual level to the collective level of the management team. The combination of increased clarity and reduced stress seems to have created a situation in which interpersonal relationships, that is the second major area of need in management development, which was identified by Porter and McGibbon, spontaneously also improved. If we look around us today, we are living in a very highly stressed era, and TM can be hugely beneficial during this present time as well. I would now like to look at the COVID-19 pandemic, which is, some say, has brought up an era of consciousness or enlightenment. Managers and entrepreneurship should be more aware of the world around us today. They should create harmonious relationships with the environment. For years, management and entrepreneurs were bombarded with profit, bottom line, and then came the reawakening to triple bottom line and respect for the planet, which we have been constantly damaging and defiling in our quest for modern civilization, power, and monetary gains. But COVID-19 made us take a step back and think and reassess our priorities. We now have time to reflect and change our ways. Our obligation as managers and entrepreneurs is to provide goods and services to mankind that are safe to the planet as well. Therein lies the challenge. Management and entrepreneurship education has to rearrange curriculum and change the mindsets of young people to be more responsible, more respectful, and more aware of their actions and how it impacts on the planet and its other inhabitants. From the discussion undertaken, my view is that management and entrepreneurship thought has to change and move towards a more holistic approach. Management and entrepreneurship education should not only focus on profit, but on sustainability and ethical behavior and skills that govern management for a better society that values its environment, its planet, and its people. Lance, Block, and Wenzel are of the opinion that education plays an important role in laying the foundation for sustainable-driven entrepreneurship. Sustainability and entrepreneurship usually at university level are taught separately rather than interdisciplinary. You found that Giovanna and Lorenzo add that business schools often teach entrepreneurship students a profit-first mentality, which negatively influences their intention to engage in sustainable entrepreneurship. Therefore, management and business schools should promote sustainable development from an entrepreneurial and opportunity identification perspective to improve the students' understanding of the benefits of sustainable entrepreneurship. To save our planet and our people, it starts in the classroom. Our curriculum has to change and include core values like sustainable development, ethics, so that entrepreneurs and managers can be trained to see not just the profit, but see beyond the profit, that being the responsibility of the planet and the people in the planet when they create, invent, develop, sell, or promote their goods and services in society. Thank you, Thea. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Prof. Naidoo. That was very interesting reflections indeed. So let me try to have a quick summation of the points. And I heard Rose speaking about the concept of artificial intelligence and fourth industrial revolution, and my way to make the key points still through this, going back to pen and paper, which one feel comfortable with. So before we hand over to the panel discussion, the key points that I draw from Prof. Dan's presentation was the word action. And the word action was bringing both concepts of entrepreneurship together. He spoke about management as a center of wealth creation, where wealth not necessarily refers to economic or money wealth. Also mentioned that it's a very complex concept to wrap our heads around and also to teach. He raised a question on how well have we as a society been doing when it comes to the concept of management in teaching, learning, and applying it? And are we producing a better society through having the knowledge and having the skills? He also spoke about our society coming a long way through social achievements, and that there's through his search over 80,000 books plus on management regarding and even more on papers being written on that. He raised a caution on the debate and discourse of pretense of knowledge, and that came up in Professor Rowe's presentation as well, and not for it to be deterministic, especially as other sciences. He mentioned the Henrys. Mintzberg and Fayol found that when they investigated in factories, that at that stage, the practice and the theory were vastly different, and again reiterated the point that both concepts are all about action. And entrepreneurship is been said that it's an evolving concept, and it's coming from the economic school of thought with a focus on production. However, the way how we think about the concept today, a strong emphasis is coming on the entrepreneurial mindset and thinking. That was also being concurred by Professor Rose, where she spoke about the behavioral school within management and the psychological school of thought within entrepreneurship. That was picked up by Prof. Naidoo as she spoke about transcendental thought as a tool for both improving management and entrepreneurship concepts. There was a mention by Prof. Dan that there's becoming an unfortunate stigmatism on the concept of entrepreneurship as a save-it-all practice that can turn societies and economic growth around, and spoke about the examples of the big four that's currently dominating thoughts on innovation. Now, coming to David, he reinforced the point that there's a difference between theory and applied, and that the application of scientific methods as we present it to the classroom can be much different than when we go out and apply it in the workplace. Summarizing Prof. Roche's epistemology, she started with epistemology and a brief overview of management as a concept. And I did point out there was a lot of synergies in her presentation on the theorist and the pretense of knowledge, which might result into ways that we need to relook into ways how we transfer our knowledge. She pointed out that innovation is the key link between management practice and entrepreneurial practice, and that managers need to have both innovative skills and entrepreneurial abilities. She ended with an emphasis that although these concepts started off in the era of the first industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution that we currently at, brought in a rethinking on how we reapply our management and entrepreneurship theories in the era that this technology demands new ways of thinking. So the concept of management brought an innovation of privacy through technology. She pointed out that it introduced this is Prof. Naidoo, I'm sorry, that she emphasized that these concepts today, through the fourth industrial revolution, is bringing a potential privacy invasion, and that's been brought through technology. And she introduced a transcendental consciousness, as mentioned earlier, as a potential tool to use. She also emphasized the behavioral school of thought and psychological school of thought as key important, but pointed out that sustainability and ethics are crucial elements to incorporate into the ways academia transfer knowledge and skills in our practice as academia and also in our practice as society members. So with this in mind, I want to open and introduce the panel into a discussion, and we've allocated 20 minutes for this panel discussion. Again, if you've got some questions, I see it coming in at the Q&A tool. After our panel discussion, we will then take your question and answers. May I ask the panel, please? It's open to you. You're welcome to start your panel discussion. David, Dan, Rose, and Vannie, over to you.
Thea, I'd like to start off by asking you a question. Thea, how popular are undergraduate degrees in management and entrepreneurship in South Africa at the moment?
We've got 26 South African public universities. To the best of my knowledge, I can be wrong, Each of the public universities in South Africa do have a faculty, a school or department, they call it different names, of management something. Business management, applied management, management studies. And to my understanding and knowledge, in these 26 South African public universities, under the management or business studies department of faculties, concepts of entrepreneurship being taught.
I was just wondering about the expectations of the students who come to study management as an undergraduate. I did an economics and political science degree, my first degree, and I didn't have any clue what that was about, and I was, just went to university because I thought it was the right thing to do. But I wonder if some of the students who are going to university these days and taking these courses are actually expecting to come out with skills. One of the questions that has been asked in the Q&A was how are we going to be able to do something about the issue that is continually raised about the fact that a lot of businesses say that we do not prepare students to be work ready. And I find the whole idea of being work ready as a very strange one, because I don't really know what work ready actually means. It's a strange way of putting it. That do we expect people to know about the particular firm that somebody's going to join? Do we expect people to be able to sit at a desk and be able to pick up the immediately engage with the type of issues that are facing the organization immediately? I'm not entirely sure. I think our whole idea of what we want to teach in terms of management and entrepreneurship needs to be examined quite closely. I don't know. Over to you.
Yeah, anyway, so I think this is one of the existential problems that business schools face, obviously, when it comes to training students. So there is this pressure on us to make students or to do more practical stuff. There's been instances where you will be teaching in a class and the student will just raise their hand and say, so how will this help me to get a job? And obviously, because of this new practice 10, where we think that going to university is all about preparing people for jobs out there. But as we all know, universities are not supposed to be glorified vocational institutions. Universities are supposed to develop individuals. You're supposed to be rounded. So even though you've come to study management, there's no organization out there where you finish and you go in there, you become a manager. You don't go straight to become a manager. It's about developing students to be rounded, to understand, and to be able to operate. It's just like in modern times, when you go to the City of London, for example, more than 70% of the people who work in finance and stuff, they didn't necessarily study finance at university. Some of them did physics. So
I'm still not able to copy and paste. I want to.
Our responsibility is to train students to be rounded, to be able to fit in whatever context that they are in, and that there will have to be a push away from this idea of practice, where in recent times you even hear some universities teaching entrepreneurship programs where the students come in and they're not supposed to take any classes. They're supposed to start a business. They call that team entrepreneurship program. It started somewhere in Finland. Obviously, it may work very well in Finland, but in other contexts, it can be extremely problematic. And these are some of the issues we have to be looking at. And if we get pulled too much towards this issue of practice, then we lose the idea of developing students also to become rounded and be able to apply theoretical ideas to solve problems. You can't solve problems without theory. The most practical theory is those that are actually more theoretical, if you put it that way, in the words of Kurt Lewin.
I mean, David, I completely agree with the idea. I mean, I struggle a lot to be able to make up my mind as to why I think somebody should go to university. I change my mind a lot as I go through that, and I often go through this business about. I don't quite use the word rounded, but I understand it, and I think it's a good word. But I use a different way of describing it. But the problem has become is that it's become so terribly expensive to go to university now that people when we've got this attitude, we've got to have a return on investment. We've got to have a quick payback, and it's really hard to argue against that, especially when the rest of our culture is set up. As you know, the stock exchange wants improved results every 90 days. I mean, goodness sake. We've got our values all screwed up in a way.
Well, I don't know the situation with South Africa, but for the UK, for example, you will agree with me, education has become extremely commoditized here. Now students are paying £9,000, they want returns, and they want, someone will come to you, so what can I do to get an A,
Yeah.
Any kind of thing. It's not just about getting an A, it's about understanding the ideas and understanding, getting to appreciate what is it that we learn. And so there is this massive pressure as a result of this commodification or commoditization of higher education. People want returns. You've got the Office of Students putting pressure on us. Universities, obviously, we're talking about having good degrees, for example. These days, if you get a 2-2 degree, you're obviously in trouble by finding a very good job. So everybody wants to get a 2-1, a first class. And to some extent, it has become very difficult. And these are some of the issues that we face as
David, can I add? And Dan, so that me and Rose can come in briefly.
Yes, no, of course.
I like the discussion as it's going. I also agree with what David has said, because the idea is going to university is the first step for students to get empowered with the necessary knowledge, the necessary mindset, etc., of our organization's work, our management work, our entrepreneurship work. The idea is it is no guarantee. Because people invest money, that does not necessarily mean you automatically get a job. When we develop our curriculum, we also look at it from what government wants and what is out there as well, so that we can be, for example, in the fourth industrial revolution, we add more skills in terms of students understanding what is needed in terms of communicating there as managers, what is needed in terms of being better managers in this era. However, we need to be cognizant of the fact that this is not a one-fits-all thing, and it's just a key. Students also have to work hard, apply themselves, go out, put themselves out there, as David has also said. You start off with, for example, a little, how shall we say, you go into a firm to be a trainee, etc. Getting to the top, we all started as students. I got my first degree in accounting, auditing, and tax, and I took management as an extra addition. But everybody's life changes and you adapt to the circumstance. However, you put your best foot forward. As an individual, we need to train our students with the emotional intelligence and the critical thinking that says, own your life, own your destiny. You go forward, you pave your way. These are the tools. Yes, the degree helps you open a door, but you got to be assertive. This is what we need to do in society.
Vannie, you are absolutely right. I've never heard such a good presentation on the fact that we need emotional intelligence. And you know what? I never came across a university that taught emotional intelligence. And I sometimes wonder, is it possible to teach emotional intelligence? You're right.
I think the idea is while we are
I
putting
need to
knowledge
quickly, we are
forward
going,
and creating knowledge, what we do is we incorporate the idea of emotional intelligence, the ideology. We bring in examples, we make it practical, and then it's more interrelated to the students, so they adapt. Yes.
Rose has been trying to come in. Rose, why don't you unmute yourself and come in?
I wanted to add, I was looking at the work readiness, and I was thinking that we also have to disabuse the minds of our young men and women who go to university, whatever programs they read, whether it is management or entrepreneurship, that you don't always go to the university and at the end of the day you expect the job to be there for you. You should also be able to set up something on your own. I'm saying this because you come to Ghana and you have a lot of students, they call themselves unemployed graduates, and you see a lot of opportunities around. It is just that sometimes, like you said, they think that immediately they finish university, then they should get a managerial job. They don't know that you have to start from somewhere. And if you are not employed, can you also employ someone? And one of the things we are even trying to emphasize on in my university is to identify how we can incorporate the 21st century skills into all our programs. And some of these skills are team building skills, critical thinking skills, how to even communicate, how to innovate, how to be creative. So by the time you go through whatever program, management, entrepreneurship, and you are able to build these skills, and you finish, you don't go and wait if there is no job somewhere. You'll be able to start something on your own. So what I'm putting in here is that there is the need for us to build the skills of our students. I'm not talking about vocational technical skills, but we are looking at some of these soft skills so that anywhere they find themselves, whether they are employed by someone or they are starting businesses on their own, they'll be able to bring about changes in the environment within which they find themselves. And the change I'm talking about, it is not always starting a for-profit organization. We can even start a social enterprise that impacts the community within which they live.
Rose, look, I think the idea of saying to everybody, it's sometimes extremely hard to get a job and you should have your wits about you to look for opportunities and to take them up. I think that's an excellent thing to do. And the bit that I mentioned about trying to inculcate a entrepreneurial mindset in everybody, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. But I think there's a huge caveat, and that is that there's an enormously big percentage, and I don't know what it is today. When I did my MBA, they told me that 95% of all companies fail, all startups fail. And so, you have to be just so careful that you don't tell people it's dead easy to start up your own business, go and do it. You've got to say to them, if you can't find a decent job, then maybe you've got to start up a business. And if you do, it is really tough.
Yes, we tell them. I teach entrepreneurship and I tell them that it is hard work, tenacity, and
really
focus.
Hard work.
And failure is part of the learning experience. You start something, once in a while you fail, but of course, when you fail, that's why when you have these 21st century skills, you sit down, reflect. Why did I fail? Maybe I didn't do my homework well, or maybe I bit more than I could chew. So you see, usually when we are talking about entrepreneurs, like David was saying, we are saying they are always heroes. But if you go and you talk to them, Jack Ma and co, they will tell you how many times they failed before at the end of the day they were able to succeed. So we tell them that it is hard work, it is not rosy.
Yes,
but of course, you can't also sit down without doing nothing. You have to start something.
Rose, despite the fact that Thea wants me to stop and doesn't want me to say anything, there's something I really want to say.
Yeah.
Because it's something that really annoys me, and that is that, and you didn't say this, but you reminded me of somebody who did say it, and they say, we tell people failure is all right. And we tell people, and somebody once said at a meeting I was at, we encourage failure. And I got up and I said, don't talk such rubbish. You can't encourage
We don't encourage, but we tell them that you don't always succeed. But when you fail, it is an experience.
No, we should be forgiving of failure, and we should say that because you failed, you shouldn't stop. That's absolutely true. But every time somebody fails, they're burning up their capital. They're burning up their energy. I mean, failure has got to be avoided. But if they do happen to fail.
Yes.
All right. I will need to come in here. And I think if I knew that we are going to have such a fascinating discussion, I would have probably set the time for this webinar for 3 hours, because I'm sure we can continue very length at this topic. However, we would like to give some of the delegates opportunity to speak. As I said at the beginning, we might ask some of the audience to unmute themselves. I've got a question here from Shoran Singh. Shoran, I've read your question, and I would please ask you to present your question to the panel. I did unmute you.
Yeah, thank you. The panelists, I'm quite interested. You know, our society is always in flux, and our systems are prone to failure and are not designed robustly. What is the new research agenda for entrepreneurship, and how would Africa drive this new research agenda? Thank you.
Thanks, Shoran. Anybody, can the panel members please, by a raise of hands, just show who would like to address this question, or maybe please start with you, Prof. Rose. How would you like to address Shoran's question?
Well, the research agenda, there are quite a number of them, but one that catches my eye is what we call the impact investment. And I think Vannie mentioned that we are looking at sustainable entrepreneurship. So we are encouraging people to start something, but at the end of the day, we are telling them that whatever you are starting should be able to generate a positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside whatever returns you are expecting on your investment. So sustainable entrepreneurship is one of the things we are looking at. And remember, I've indicated that entrepreneurship is not only starting your own business. Even when you are working within an organization, what creative or innovative things can you also bring into the organization so that the organization will grow and also impact the society and the environment positively. So one of them is what we call social entrepreneurship, and people call it impact investment. And those are some of the things we are also trying to look at. We are looking at impact, sustainable. We are looking at, some people even call it the green economy, eco entrepreneurship. Those are some of the things that are trending now in that area.
Thank you so much, Prof. Rose. Shoran, I hope your question was addressed. Thank you. I've got another comment from Professor Gervais. It's a comment, a contribution, not a question. However, I would like to also ask him, Professor Chuck Gervais, just to, I've unmuted you. And if you please can just state your comment live, it would be appreciated.
All right. Good afternoon, colleagues. My comment stems from having served as head of Department of Entrepreneurship and Business Management at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology for over 8 years now. We struggle to meet our enrollment target every year. And I can tell you that I'm not alone. You know, I've received same comments from my colleagues in other universities who had departments of entrepreneurship. it's always a struggle to get students enrolled during the beginning of the academic year. You know, they all advance towards these established programs, marketing, human resource management. And that's understandable because, you know, entrepreneurship as a discipline is relatively new in universities. But there, 1,001 persons will certainly point towards a number of practicing entrepreneurs, but never would they consider that you could study this. So I think one of the things we should be doing is perhaps to create a lot more visibility of the program, you know, publicize it as beautifully, as attractive as possible, you know, and even in our teaching styles, we shouldn't be doing basic classroom engagement. And that's one of the things we've started doing at CPUT in the last 3.5 years, to engage external folks to come into the classroom, to get our students out there, to hang out with traders, you know, business folks, to attend these kinds of a conference, you know, the software we're having, so that people would understand that discussions about how to enrich entrepreneurship education are on. And so that they can also start imagining themselves learning to become entrepreneurs and not necessarily having to just dabble into it. Dabbling into it is fantastic, of course, and it can bring the results, but it is important that we start creating the necessary visibility, the necessary publicity for entrepreneurship as a discipline. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution and your willingness to share. I truly appreciate it. I want to take a question, and the next person I would like to unmute is Roger Elliott. I picked your question up from the Q&A toolbox. So Roger, I've unmuted you and added you to the discussion. If you want to address your question, this perhaps would be good for you. Right, Roger. Roger is in, but it seems there might be a bit of an issue with the sound. Roger, yes, we can hear you. Okay, welcome.
Sorry, my mistake. Yes, you know, I've been doing a bit of research on mindful sort of management, and I was just quite interested to hear the presentation or part of the presentation of Professor Naidoo about transcendental management. I think was the term used. I wasn't quite sure of the term, but essentially it's almost the same thing in that you know, you try and clear your mind so you can focus and you can think innovatively, and that kind of relates to my question. But just to kind of add on what Professor Dan had to say earlier about emotional intelligence and universities, we are sort of at Fort Hare driving sort of degree in entrepreneurship, and one of our courses is personal mastery, where you try and master your personal kind of not affairs, not the right word, but manage yourself personally. So in order, because we think that's quite an important element, those soft skills when it comes to entrepreneurship. So it's sort of our first year that we're doing it, so presenting it, so a lot to learn, but it's just I thought I'd just make that observation while I had the floor, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger, for asking the question live and joining us. May I please ask Prof. Naidoo to address this question?
Thank you, Roger. Roger, it was referred to as transcendental consciousness, which theorists have argued, which is an essential practice that managers and entrepreneurs can use within the organization. Since we're bombarded with such stressful situations, the life is so stressful, especially managers, they are dealing with so much on their plate. So what occurs was that they used a premise developed by the yogi and took it into practice, where they started training managers and staff within the organizations in actual transcendental meditation technique to kind of, how shall we say, get people to become less stressed, more creative, and more relaxed. When our mind is more at ease, we become more productive individuals. So the idea is, for example, when I did a fellowship in Gävle, Sweden, and I was teaching gender and identity in the workplace. And at that time, my students used to fly in from Iraq, Iran, etc., into the country to just they were top management levels. They came in. This was an international class. And at the time, it was very difficult because a law at that time, it was a kind of a crazy law that said that, if you don't, against women, where you can not give a woman food if she denies you certain marital rights. And in the classroom, we were kind of appalled because I'm teaching gender and identity. And then he says to me, but it's, one of my foreign students from the country, he says to me, but ma'am, I have been trained, this is the culture. And I said, then the other students got quite upset, especially the female ones. And then I said to them, let's just take a step backward now. Let's not get volatile about this. And I used, let's just change our mindset, how to calm our minds. This is a great platform. So I used, we went into visualization techniques and meditation. And once the class got into a more relaxed mood, we did 25 minutes of that. Then we got out of it. And then we decided to, in a calmer way, embrace the concept of gender identity, gender in the workplace, and how different cultures view it, and how we sometimes need to change our views from a cultural concept and to be more embracive of a global setting, especially when you are a manager in a global platform like MTN, and you cannot use what's going at home with your managers in an international platform. So this was a very good way of, how shall we say, a great tool. And in the area of stress that we as people go through in this time of COVID, I think this type of meditation is excellent. I use it. Many of my colleagues use it, etc. And it helps in our, how shall we say, appreciation of life and garnering more, how shall we say, of our creativity and because we need to interact in the best way possible with others, because it affects everybody. Thank you so much. Sorry, Dr. Thea.
Thank you so much, and thanks for raising the question. We spent some time on this idea. If we look through both the chat box and the Q&A, several comments came in on how do we balance and improve our mindsets, thoughts, and tools and practices on that. So I did see the other comments in the Q&A box, and I hope through this question and the address, those of you that post similar questions got addressed by it. We said we will not keep you later than 1 o'clock South Africa time, and we are exactly on 1 o'clock. So on the program, we did say that we will give everybody an opportunity for a closing remark. However, let's stick to the program. If you got any other questions, when we circulate the video afterwards, we will send you a copy of the video. We will also post our panelists' email addresses. You're welcome to reach out and make contact. So at this moment, I would just like the panelists to say goodbye, because we would run out of time. Professor Remenyi, Dr. Sarpong, Professor Boone, Professor Naidoo, thank you so much for joining our webinar today. University of KwaZulu-Natal, College of Law and Management Studies, School of Management, IT and Governance, Discipline of Management and Entrepreneurship. We look forward to host similar webinars in the future. And thank you so much for putting an hour and 30 minutes of your time aside to join us today. A warm goodbye from Durban, and we see you all soon within the near future. Goodbye.
Yeah, can I do a group photograph before we sign off? All of the
There's
presenters?
there's a question, right, panelists, if you can just please remain, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you're a panelist. I can see Shorin and Roger still here. You're welcome to stay.
Why don't we have a group with all 80 people who are left? Everybody.
So please turn on.
Can we all look at the screen? Look forward so that I could do a picture. Okay, smiling. Great, lovely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.